Tonight we are going to look at Parasha Shemini, of course, and we have the insights of the ve-ha-Kabbalah to explore together. So let's get underway. So Parasha Shemini is dominated by, dominated by two themes, although actually I'd like to discuss the final subject, which maybe we'll get to when we get there. So let's say that it's dominated initially by the theme of the death of the sons of Aharon. They were participating in the inauguration of the Mishkan. It was a day of great exaltation. It was a day of forgiveness, the final sort of dramatic conclusion in the process of building the Mishkan, which was a form of expiation of the chet ha'egel, of the sin of the golden calf. So that subject takes up much of the second half of the book of Shmos. The first two parshas of Vayikra deal with the sacrificial system, of course, which was part of the Mishkan, which took place in the Mishkan. And now we have actually the only narrative passage in the whole book of Vayikra that describes the inauguration on the 8th day. So I'd like to share with you the approach that ve-ha-Kabbalah advances regarding the nature of the fate of Nadav and Avihu. Nadav and Avihu were two sons of Aharon. He had four sons. Nadav and Avihu were, I think, the firstborn, the elder of the two sons of Aharon, and their father was initiated into the role of the Kohen Gadol. They were naturally the assistants to their father, but it seems that they sought a more prominent role, or perhaps they were so inspired and so motivated and so passionate about the opportunity to serve the God of Israel on behalf of the whole nation, that the Torah says how they took an unauthorized incense and they entered the Holy of Holies. And okay, but actually I'm getting slightly ahead of the game. But I want to start with, after this introduction, I want to start by looking at chapter 9, verse 24. So here, this is initially before the events which I've already begun to describe, but before that, so we have a description of the successful inauguration of the Mishkan. And in verse 24, if you have the art scroll, stone chumash, it's on page 590. It's the beginning of Shlishi. But Hashem, a fire went out from before God, v'tochal al mizbeach, and it consumed the offering on the mizbeach, on the altar. Es ha'olav, es ha'chalavim. All the people saw and they sang out, they cried out in joyful music. It says here, glad song. And they fell on their faces. It was such a dramatic, inspiring moment of exaltation when this fire came from heaven, and it consumed the offering. So ve-ha-Kabbalah is interested in that word vatochal. The word vatochal means, and it consumed. Of course, the word achila usually means to eat. Ochel is food. Le'echol is to eat. Achila is eat. Vatochal, it would mean literally that it ate. But of course, it's rendered here in the art scroll in the English, consumed, and there's no question that from the context, that's what it means. The fire does not eat, but in a kind of maybe poetic or metaphorical way, we can say, as the Torah does, that the fire ate or consumed. Says ve-ha-Kabbalah, we do find, of course, that the word achila is used for destroying or consuming. It says, and he gives a couple of examples, Vayirav haya'ar le'echol ba'am me'asher achla ha'cherem. On a certain occasion, it says, not in the Torah itself, but in the book of Shmuel, that the forest consumed more people than the sword. Perhaps they were set upon by beasts, or maybe they perished in other ways in the forest. It says vayarav haya'ar lechol, the forest consumed more people, or it says vayochelu, and they ate. So that is a pasuk, that is a word that we find regarding the visitors who came to the tent of Abraham and Sarah, and they were in fact malachim, as the Torah makes clear subsequently, but initially Abraham is welcoming them as if they are passing Bedouins or people who require or who will appreciate his hospitality, and he provides, as we know, a banquet for them. And it says Vayochel, and they ate. It says ve-ha-Kabbalah. Of course, these are angels; they weren't really eating. So Rashi says, well, they seem to eat because when in Rome, do as the Romans or something like that. The ve-ha-Kabbalah says that the Malachim had the power in a kind of supernatural way, as angels perhaps are able to do, to consume the food without actually eating it. In other words, he assumes they didn't actually eat it, but it says vayochelu because it consumed it. So in a similar way here, vatochal, it says that the fire came down, al mizbeach, and it consumed the offering. That is the usual meaning of the word achila from the context. In other words, when a person eats, so you put something in your mouth, you chew it, you swallow it, and you've essentially, maybe destruction is not the right term, but you've changed the form of whatever food. You have an apple, when you chew it, without getting too technical, it's not an apple anymore by the time you swallow it and it goes through the digestive system. So it's in that sense that achila is used to consume. Says ve-ha-Kabbalah, a novelty though. He says we find another meaning of the word achila, and this he will use this as a kind of entree to analyzing the fate of Nadav and Avihu, as we'll see in one moment. So he says that we find in the case of Yirmiyah, the prophet Jeremiah, and the prophet Yechezkel. I'll give you the pasuk that he mentions. Echolas ha-Megillah hazos. Hashem says to Yirmiyah, to the prophet Jeremiah, eat this scroll. It probably wasn't like the Megillah Esther, it was a lot shorter, but he says, eat it. I don't know if it was made of parchment, probably not, paper that he could eat. I mean, it's not normal food. Va'ochla says, and I ate it, vati befi kidvash lemato, and it was as sweet as honey in my mouth. We find in the case of Yechezkel, that was Yechezkel, I'm sorry. It says, Yirmiyah says that the words were as joyful to me. It was a source of gladness. In the case of Yechezkel, he's the one who said, when I ate it, and it was very sweet in my mouth. So it says, ve-ha-Kabbalah, we see in those cases that whether he actually ate or it was just a figure of speech, that the word for eat is used in the sense of something which is pleasing, which is pleasurable, which is sweet, which is enjoyable. He says that according to Rashi and the Targum there, besimcha uvatava, because let's face it, often we eat if we eat and we're hungry, then of course we enjoy the food because we're hungry. Sometimes I can speak for myself, I eat even though I'm really not that hungry, but the food is so appealing, it's so tasty, it's so desirable that I eat and I enjoy eating it. It may not be the healthiest choice, to be honest, but I don't think I'm unique in that regard. So ve-ha-Kabbalah says that achila is not only a biological, chemical process by which the food is essentially destroyed and consumed and nourishes the person. The achila also often means to eat something in a joyful way, in a pleasurable way. Not only that, but although he doesn't say this, I'm not sure why, but I've added here in my notes, which I want to share with you, that we find regarding Matan Torah, the Torah says that the Torah says El Atzilei Bnei Israel lo shalach yado, that Hashem did not stretch out his hand against the nobles of Israel. Now, there are many different interpretations of this, but it says, you can look it up if you want or make a note of it, look it up after, but you can find it in your Chumash if you've got it in front of you. It's Exodus chapter 24, verse 11. So towards the end of Parashas Mishpatim. Shmos Chaf Dalet Pasuk Yud Aleph. It says, Vayochlu vayishtu. They ate and they drank. And Targum Onkelos says that the experience of seeing the Shekhinah was as nourishing and as fulfilling as if they ate and they drank. When a person goes to a party, to a wedding, to a celebration, or even Shabbos meal or Yom Tov, when it's a mitzvah to eat and to drink and to enjoy, then he gets pleasure from the eating and the drinking. Hopefully, that is the case. So the Targum Onkelos says that the experience was so nourishing for them spiritually. It was as if they ate and they drank. So from there we see that achila can also have the meaning, again, beyond the nourishment, the chemistry, the biology, beyond that, or even the nutrition, beyond that, it also is something which a person does, and it gives pleasure, it gives joy, and he eats and feels the gladness as a result. Says ve-ha-Kabbalah. Now, when we look a few verses later, if you just turn in my Chumash, I'm turning the page, the beginning of chapter 10, and having seen that the fire came down from heaven and consumed on the altar, it says, each one took his fire pan and put fire in it, or ketores, which is incense, and they brought before God Eish Zara, a strange and unauthorized fire, about which they were not commanded. And then it says again the same turn of phrase, a fire came forth from God and it consumed them. Says ve-ha-Kabbalah. The previous time that we were just talking about, there the fire came down and it consumed it in the sense of again, not destroying, but consuming the offering. That's what fire does. Again, if we use that slightly metaphorical imagery. In the case here, though, this is the fire that didn't consume them, even though the Art Scroll renders it, a fire came forth and consumed them. But says ve-ha-Kabbalah, this is the other type of achila. This is a type of achila where the Torah uses that term, but it refers to the joy that Hashem felt, not so much in taking their lives in the sense of, vindictiveness, but on the contrary, they were motivated by love. They were motivated by an abundance of love. He quotes the Medrash, it says, Amdu lahosif ahava al ahava. They were so inspired. They were so uplifted. They were so full of exaltation as the family, meaning the sons of Aharon, who were commissioned, who were instructed to represent the Jewish people in their service of Hashem. And now the Mishkan was complete and the inauguration was underway. They wanted to express more love. They were so magnetically attracted to the Shekhinah. And he says, Amdu lahosif ahava al ahava. And Hashem, he says, took their souls. The achila here is the joy. It's the sense of love, and he substantiates that, because if you take a close look, let's read it again in Pasuk Beis. And as we were saying now, drew their souls with a sense of pleasure and joy. And they died before God. Observes ve-ha-Kabbalah, the death should have come first. Or what does that have to say? And they died. Meaning, if they died by fire, then it would say that they died and the bodies were consumed by the fire, but that's not the case. He says in the instance of the cohorts of Korach, there also, it says, I'll just read you the words because he quotes it. He says that in the case of Korach, a fire went out from before God and consumed them. It doesn't say there that they died, because they died because the fire consumed them. They died by fire in the case of the Korach people. But here in the case of Nadav and Avihu, their souls were drawn to Hashem, and this fire, therefore, was not the fire of anger, divine anger or divine punishment, but rather it was the fire that represented their passion and their potent desire for closeness to God. Now, he doesn't elaborate further on whether they sinned or whether they did whether what they did was possibly praiseworthy. This is a difficult question, which we're not going to dwell on now, because at the end of the day, it was a tragedy for Aharon, tragedy probably for all the people as well, meaning for the whole nation. And in fact, it even says one is allowed to fast on Rosh Chodesh Nisan in memory of the death of the sons of Aharon, because this event happened on Rosh Chodesh Nisan. So it's a kind of multifaceted question as to whether what they did was praiseworthy or blameworthy. But according to ve-ha-Kabbalah, he approaches the matter following the view that we find in Chazal and many other sources, that they were motivated, maybe they erred, but they were motivated by a desire to get close to Hashem. Perhaps they went too far, could well be. But the fire was not a punishment, it was a consequence. And he uses as his entree the dual meaning of the word achila. Achila means to consume, but achila can also mean to experience with joy and with desire, with pleasure. And he says, Vatochalo Sam, when the fire came out from before God, so to speak, Hashem welcomed their souls into the highest level of Gan Eden. Okay, we'll leave it at that. As I said, much is written about this subject, and it is a nuanced one because of the reason that we said at the end of the day, certainly for Aaron, it was a tragedy, and I'm sure we can learn much more from it. But I want to now turn to an important nuance, which is so exemplary of the approach of our friend for the year, ve-ha-Kabbalah. I'm referring to verse 12, Pasuk Yud Beis, just a bit further in this chapter 10. Vaydaber Hashem Moshe el Aharon Vaydaber Moshe el Aharon ve'el Elazar ve'el Isamar banav hanosarim. Now the article render it his remaining sons, etc. So Aharon had 4 sons. Nadav and Avihu, as we've just seen, died, and therefore Moshe says to Aharon and to Elazar and Itamar, who are the 2 remaining sons of Aharon, etc. But ve-ha-Kabbalah is interested in the word hanosarim, and he wants to explain. He will explain for us the difference between the word yitera and the word notar and nishar. Nishar and notar. Nishar is like left, as opposed to like what is remaining, I guess. And notar also means what's remaining. Now, the word nishar, or rather the word notar, means like left over. It comes from the word yoter, which means more, but it's related to the word surplus. Yoter, like that which is surplus or superfluous. He says that notar is something which is not the main part. It's just like whatever is left over. Nishar is an expression of esteem, of importance. So Rashi says on this pasuk, if you take a look at pasuk Yud Beis, so Rashi says, hanosarim, those who were remaining, or literally those who are left over, because he had 4 sons to have died. Says Rashi, hanosarim mean hamisa, who were left over from the death, meaning that the 2 sons of Aaron died, but he has 2 sons who are still alive. Says Rashi, melamed she'af aleim niknas hamisa. From here we learn that the decree of death, the death sentence, was proclaimed against them as well. But because of Aharon's merit, he sustained the tragic death of 2 sons, but his other 2 sons remained alive. And again, it fits into the many other aspects about the Aaron's role in the Chet HaEgel. But it says ve-ha-Kabbalah, how do the sages know, how does Rashi know that indeed, the other two sons, the two surviving sons, the two remaining sons, were also subject to this decree of death, and their decree was commuted, or they were allowed, Aaron was given a partial clemency. How do the rabbis know that? Maybe Nadav and Abihu did something that was either wrong or certainly had the effect of ending in sudden death. And the other ones, Elazar and Tamar, did not do anything wrong. So they have nothing to do with their brother's fate. How do the sages know? Says ha-Kabbalah, it's hinted to in the word nosar, because the word she'er, nish'ar, is an expression of esteem, of importance. So therefore, a wife is called she'er basar. It says in Mishpatim, she'ira ksusa v'onasa lo sigra, which according to Ramban, all of those refer to the intimate aspect of a marriage, because she'er is an expression of closeness, of physical intimacy and closeness. So a wife is called she'er, a wife is called she'er because she's important. She's nish'ar. Nish'ar is that which remains and is important. Nosar means that which remains and is not important. So therefore, says ha-Kabbalah, the sages know, Rashi, according to Chazal, know that there's a hint that they were also worthy of punishment, because the Torah uses that expression of they happened to survive, but really they were also subject to this decree. I would just like to add, he alludes to it here, but he speaks about it in more detail elsewhere. ha-Kabbalah says the following, I think, very beautiful comment, which I want to add on this same point because it's pertinent to Pesach. There is a category of nosar, nun vav taf resh. It's the same word we're talking about here, nosarim. Nosar means left over, and a korban, a sacrifice, which is supposed to be eaten during a certain time interval, and it is not consumed, but it's left over, has to be burnt. In the case of korban Pesach, it says explicitly, lo sosirim en ad boker, don't leave anything over until the morning. This is the korban Pesach. Why does it say lo sosiru, that word nosar? And yet in the case of Pesach Shemini, it says, lo yashiru. In the case of Pesach Sheni, lo yashiru. Again, in the case of the korban Pesach, the Torah says lo sosiru, using the word nosar. In the case of the second Pesach, you know that Pesach Sheni is an opportunity in antiquity, an opportunity for those who were unable to eat the korban Pesach in the right time because they were out of town, they were traveling, or a person who was in a state of ritual impurity because of contact with the dead. So such a person had the opportunity to eat the korban Pesach 1 month later. But in the case of Pesach Sheni, the same prohibition is applicable. Don't leave anything over till the morning. But there it says lo yashiru, and in the case of korban Pesach, lo sosiru. What's the difference? Why is it different expression? ha-Kabbalah says, I think it's brilliant. He says, in the case of the korban Pesach, so when the Jewish people would come together on the Seder night in ancient times, they would eat the korban Pesach, but they would also eat the korban chagiga. I don't want to get too technical, but the korban Pesach is the Paschal lamb, and that was unique to the first night of Pesach. They would also bring a korban chagiga, which is a festive offering, and they would eat that as well. And this is why, as we know, and it's applicable even nowadays when we eat the afikomen, it should be nechal al hasova. It should be eaten when we are already satiated. A person should not eat the korban Pesach when he's extremely hungry and he consumes it as the main feature of his meal, because he eats the korban chagiga first, which means that by the time he eats the korban Pesach, he's not that hungry anymore. He eats it because it's a mitzvah and it recalls the events of the Exodus. Therefore, if he leaves anything over, it may well be just because he got no more appetite. He's already full. So therefore, he leaves it over, which means it's not important to him any longer because he has no appetite for it. It's like food that you like, but if you've eaten all that you can and you're completely full, then it doesn't have any appeal any longer. Okay, maybe you put it in the refrigerator or put it in the freezer for future, but if you don't have that option, so it's just surplus. That's why the Torah says, Lo Sasiri, you don't want it anymore. Don't think you can just leave it. You've got to consume, which means you've got to invite enough guests so that they can collectively consume the Korban Pesach. In the case of Pesach Sheni, there is no Korban Chagika. The Pesach Sheni, the Korban Pesach, for Pesach Sheni, it doesn't have to be eaten when you're already satisfied. It can be eaten as a main part of your meal. If that's the case, you might say, this is so good, I'm going to leave some over for tomorrow. Continue the party in the morning. Therefore, it says lo yashiru in the case of Pesach Sheni. So again, his insight is no sarim means those who are left over and they're not that important. From there, we see then that Elazar and Isamar were also worthy of losing their lives, but they were spared. And he says the hint is from the word nosarim, which is an expression of like it's almost slightly derogatory, almost like they're left over, they're surplus, they're superfluous. Whereas nish'ar would be an expression of esteem. In the minutes we have left, I want to share with you a fascinating approach that ha-Kabbalah advances regarding the very last section in our Parsha. So I said the first part of the Parsha we have discussed now, the death of Nadav and Avihu. We have some related aspects of that. And then we have the second half of the Parsha, chapter 11, deals with the kosher and non-kosher species. But towards the end of that, we have the following verse in the top, it's on, well, if you have the Art Scroll Stone Chumash, it's page 606, Pasuk Mem Dalet. So we're in chapter 11, verse 44, near the very end of the Parsha. Torah says the Torah, Kani Hashem Elokechem, I'm the Lord your God, v'hiskadishtem v'hisem kedoshim. You are to sanctify yourselves and you shall become holy. V'hiskadishtem, you shall sanctify yourselves. So ha-Kabbalah says that the Talmud in Brachos says, "V'hiskadishtem elu mayim rishonim." You shall sanctify yourselves. This is a reference to the water, the first waters. It means the water that we use to wash our hands before a meal. Because there's also mayim acharonim before we say Birkat Hamazon. But the mayim rishonim, that's the washing, the tilas yadayim that we're very familiar with. You have to fill up a cup. It doesn't have to be full, but you have to put water in a cup. You pour it over each of your hands, as we know. Why does the Torah, or why did the sages see a hint in this word v'hiskadishtem to the mitzvah, which is a rabbinic mitzvah, of washing your hands before you eat a meal, before you eat bread in particular? So he suggests that this mitzvah, or rather this expression, appears, the v'hiskadishtem appears after the account of the acceptable, the kosher and the non-kosher species, that which is permitted, that which is forbidden. In other words, it's all about eating. So therefore the rabbis say that when the Torah says v'hiskadishtem, it means when you eat, you should sanctify yourself before you eat. An aspect of tahara, of purification, that is pertinent to the seudah, to a meal, to a repast. And he says we find by the Kohanim as well, the rabbis always call it kiddush yadayim v'raglayim. There the Torah specifies explicitly there's a kior, which is a laver, and they have to wash their hands, they have to wash their feet, and this the Torah says explicitly for the Kohanim. It's a mitzvah for the Kohanim. The rabbis call that kiddush yadayim v'raglayim, the sanctification of hands and feet. And therefore, he says that in a similar way, when a man or a woman, and that doesn't have to be a Kohen, whoever that may be, even a child for that matter, is preparing to eat bread, to eat his bread, that which nourishes him, so that is also a form of divine service. That just as the Kohanim sanctify themselves by washing their hands and their feet before approaching to do the avoda in the Beis Hamikdash, similarly, you and I, when we're going to eat our food, we also sanctify ourselves in that way by washing our hands. That's v'hiskadishtem. Because a person who eats should not intend only, like I said a few minutes ago, because he's hungry or because the food is so tasty, because he enjoys the pleasure of eating the food, or even because he nourishes himself, but rather a person should have in mind, this is the way that I can serve Hashem. It's by eating and maintaining my health and my vigor that I can be the best person I can be. I can serve others and I can serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So a person who eats, that is a form of avoda. That also is a form of divine service. And he says, with this, we can also understand the expression netilas yadayim, which, to be honest, I've often wondered about. Many times I've said, I never thought of this. It's so obvious, but I wouldn't have thought of it until I saw it in ve-ha-Kabbalah. This I did think of. I didn't have his answer. But I did often wonder why we say netilas yadayim. Litol is to take. Netila is to wash. Why do we say the bracha al netilas yadayim, the mitzvah of netilas yadayim? Why don't we say rechitzas yadayim, washing the hands, or shtifas yadayim, to rinse the hands? Why do you say netilas yadayim? He asked that question. So there's certain ideas are advanced. The Rosh has a certain suggestion about it because the cup is called a natla. So therefore we call it netilas yadayim. He says that's very unconvincing. Why should we call the act, which is a mitzvah, a rabbinic mitzvah, why should we call it by the name of the vessel that is used to pour the water? He says the word netila means to lift. It means to lift up something, to take and to lift. He says it's an expression of hitnasus v'hisromamus, of elevation and exaltation, to lift something up. Like it says, vayinatlem. I want to just quote a pasuk. I hope it's familiar to you. Vayinatlem v'yinaseim kol yemei olam. He will uplift them and he will carry them all the days of forever. But you should be familiar with that because that is the last verse in the last of the 7 haftarot of consolation. After Tisha B'Av, we have 7 haftarot of consolation. Each one is inspiring and eloquent and really uplifting. So the very last pasuk in the last of the 7 haftarot is v'inatleim v'inaseim kol yemei olam. So it's an expression of uplifting. And he says, with this we can understand why the Rashba says, I don't know what time is nearly up, why the Rashba says that a person must wash his hands in the morning upon arising with a kli, with a cup, with a vessel. According to the Rosh, it's not necessary. You can just wash your hands in the sink. According to the Rashba, you should use a cup. And the Rashba, I don't have time to speak at length on this, the Rashba was a disciple of Ramban. And Ramban was the first to introduce into the wider readership of the Torah community in his day in the 13th century, the teachings of the Zohar. The Zohar is the source for the idea that when a person wakes up in the morning, Chadashim levakarem, he or she is a new person. His life has been extended by another day. The brush with death, which is sleep, has left, and therefore he must purify his hands for the day ahead. Kodesh uvarchos Hashem. Says the ve-ha-Kabbalah, this is why we have the expression netilas yadayim. And this is why the rabbis see in that verse, v'hiskadishtem, you shall sanctify yourselves, the act of washing your hands. Of course, it's not only for hygiene, it has a symbolic and a religious significance in which the purification uplifts a person and prepares him for the day ahead. And this is why the word al netilas yadayim itself implies this idea of uplifting, of purification and of sanctification to greet the day ahead, or even if it's for eating a meal, eating the meal itself can and should be a sacred activity, or at least it should have that component, that aspect of the service of Hashem. Thank you very much. I like to summarize, as we know we always do. So we spoke about the death of Nadav Avihu, and he says a novel idea. The word achila, which means to eat and often means to consume, also has the meaning of something which is done with joy. And so to speak, they were filled with ardor. They acted out of an abundance of love, and therefore their souls left them, and perhaps they even did so by choice and and deliberately, and Hashem, so to speak, welcomed their souls into the next world. We spoke about the word nosarim. The word nosar is left over, but in a kind of superfluous way. Nishar is that which remains, and that's a more exalted, a more like complementary turn of phrase. We said viskadishtem, that the sanctification is the word from which the rabbis see the hint to the rabbinic mitzvah of washing one's hands, and it's called netilas yadayim because of the uplift. Thank you very much. And so I've got to run tonight.